Melania Trump danced with him once, at the inaugural ball. At the time, no one thought twice. It was a brief, graceful moment caught on camera, then forgotten. That is, until Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett changed everything. Are you ready to tell the American people what you just showed us during the break? The host asked, leaning in, voice edged with disbelief and anticipation. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her tone was steady, her gaze locked on the camera, her demeanor calm, too calm. The kind of calm that signals you're about to drop something that can't be taken back. Yes, she said. The First Lady has been having an affair with a U.S. Army sergeant. And I have evidence it began months ago, around the time of the inaugural ball. For 2 seconds, live television fell into a stunned silence that seemed to stretch forever. Then the panel exploded. You're accusing Melania Trump, the First Lady, of cheating on the President of the United States? One guest fired back. Jasmine didn't blink. She tapped a slim folder on the table before her. That's exactly what I'm saying. And this isn't gossip. Inside this folder are redacted reports, restricted visitor logs, and a sworn statement from someone in that sergeant's unit. This is fact. The American people have a right to know. The host tried to rein it in. So just to be clear, you're saying this man, a decorated Army sergeant, had a relationship with the First Lady while she was living at the White House? No, Jasmine corrected. Not in the White House. But during travel, events, official stays, other residences. The logs don't lie. There were meetings. Repeated ones. And every time, the paperwork didn't match. Across the country, living rooms went still. Phones buzzed with "Are you watching this?" Texts flew. Social media ignited. Clips of Jasmine's words spread like wildfire. Dinner conversations paused. News networks cut from regular programming. A local station in Iowa showed a bar where every screen played the same footage. Patrons stared in silence, half-empty glasses frozen in midair. What struck people most was how Jasmine looked, not wild-eyed, not reaching for headlines. No raised voice. No theatrics. Just measured, devastating certainty. The denials came fast. White House officials dismissed the claim as absurd. One aide, speaking anonymously, called it laughable fiction. But the narrative had already escaped containment. Then someone found it, footage from the Fort Worth inaugural ball. Melania Trump in a pale blue gown. Her dance partner, an Army sergeant named Ellis Rowan at first, the clip seemed unremarkable. Formal. Ceremonial. But viewed now, through a different lens, it felt charged. The way her hand lingered on his shoulder. The smile, not posed, but warm. His eyes, fixed only on hers. Online, users slowed the video frame by frame. Someone noted a moment when her hand briefly slid to his chest. Another pointed out her lips moving. Ellis, she said. Lip readers agreed. It wasn't idle chatter. National outlets scrambled to catch up with what the internet already understood. There was more to this dance than anyone had seen. Back then, no one was paying attention. The cameras were on Donald Trump, delivering a slow, meandering speech about unity. Melania's dance faded into the background, but now, every detail was under a microscope. And Ellis Rowan? He wasn't just a random soldier filling a spot on the floor. His name hadn't been publicized, but records from Joint Base San Antonio confirmed his identity. 38. Unmarried. 2 tours overseas. Clean record. Reporters began asking, who chose him? Why him? A source from the event planning team stepped forward. Melania, they said, had personally reviewed and approved the list of dance escorts. She said he looked dignified, the source recalled. But it was the way she said it, like she already knew. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. She remained at the studio for interviews, her aide trailing behind, still clutching that folder. Then, the unthinkable happened. Melania went live. She was attending a televised charity gala in Oklahoma City, meant to be apolitical, a fundraiser for children's cancer research. Dressed in gold, she took the podium, mid-sentence, when a producer whispered through the earpiece. She froze, a tremble in her hand as she reached for her glass. Her expression shifted, not panic, not fury, just the quiet devastation of someone. Realizing something intensely private had become violently public, she stepped back from the microphone. Security moved in. Cameras cut. The screen went dark, but it was too late, because the footage from the ball was already everywhere, and Jasmine wasn't the only one with receipts. Someone unearthed a candid photo from earlier that night. Taken by a catering staffer, later sold to the press. Melania and Ellis, alone for a moment in a hallway near the kitchen. She was adjusting her bracelet. He was watching her, not like a soldier acknowledging a dignitary. Like a man who knew her. And now, one question echoed across every platform, every outlet, every household: how did we all miss this? The answer was simple: no one was looking until now. Like a man waiting for a signal, Ellis Rowan stood still in the footage, alert, unreadable, and the internet didn't wait. They look like two people who've done this before, one post read. Like they've had conversations no one else was part of, said another. Late night shows dove in immediately. Comedians danced the line between disbelief and satire, tossing jokes while the audience laughed, unsure if it was okay to laugh at all. But while the memes piled up and the clips ran on loop, a quieter, more intimate current began flowing beneath the noise. Women messaged Jasmine Crockett's account, not with punchlines, but with stories. They'd seen this before: long silences that made your stomach turn, over-explained absences that only deepened the questions, and smiles that felt like someone holding a door shut behind them. Some called it projection. Others called it instinct. Either way, the footage no longer looked like a moment. It looked like a pattern, but suspicion wasn't enough. To shake something real, there had to be more. The first message hit Crockett's encrypted inbox just before dawn. No name, no attachments, just a subject line: "You're not wrong, but there's more." The body of the email was short, tense, almost reluctant. The sender claimed to be part of Ellis Rowan's unit. They said things had shifted. Ellis had grown distant, had taken long unexplained drives, disappeared during downtime. He kept his phone with him always, even during drills, and grew defensive if anyone asked where he'd been. Crockett read it twice, then sent it to her chief of staff. Quietly, the team began vetting it, then more messages arrived. One from a junior officer stationed at Fort Sam, Houston. Another from a retired master sergeant. Each one echoing the others: something was off. And more than that, Ellis had been seen 3 times. Meeting a black SUV with government plates in a remote parking lot just outside the base. Now they started digging. Official visitor logs showed Ellis Rowan had received several visits over recent months. A few were family. One was listed as a White House liaison. 2 others were redacted. But the timestamps matched public travel data from Melania Trump's schedule. Not just close, precise. It wasn't just the who. It was the when, and the where. These weren't official receptions or public events. The meetings happened in the middle of the night, tucked into restricted guest housing typically reserved for foreign diplomats or senior brass. Someone had worked hard to keep those visits off the radar. But the pieces were no longer scattered. They just needed someone to put them in order. Crockett's team filed for access logs under the Freedom of Information Act. Progress was slow, but not silent. Whistleblowers began to trickle in. Point 1, an operations officer wrote anonymously: "I'm not saying she did anything illegal. But I know what I saw. That wasn't a policy visit." In the Dallas office, a timeline began to form. Ellis had flown into Joint Base Andrews days before Melania had quietly arrived in Maryland for what aides described as a private family visit. But no one could locate this so-called cousin. Then a local journalist found it: security camera footage from a parking garage near Annapolis. A black SUV pulled in. A man in uniform stepped out. A woman followed, her hair covered, face obscured by sunglasses. They walked to the elevator. No hotel check-in. No security footage from the upper floors. The resolution was poor. But sighed. By side with official photos, it looked like them, and now it wasn't just staffers and whistleblowers. The AN Independent podcast dropped a surprise episode called The Sergeant and the Secret. It went viral almost instantly. People weren't asking if it was true. They were asking how deep it went, because if it was true, this wasn't about infidelity anymore. It was about access, protocol, and power. How could the First Lady meet repeatedly with a military officer without clearance, without oversight? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone stopped it? One theory gained traction: maybe someone had tried, and they were ignored or silenced, which is why Jasmine's reveal wasn't just scandal, it was revelation. A system had cracked open. And now the public could see the gears turning behind the curtain, but a slow leak of information wasn't enough to ignite a cultural reckoning. The world needed a moment, something undeniable, live, impossible to spin. That moment arrived the night of the Hearts Forward Gala. Melania Trump flew into Oklahoma City for the event, a high-profile fundraiser for pediatric cancer research. It was elegant but low-key. Guests wore dark tuxedos, deep-colored dresses, and pinned ribbons to honor families in treatment. She entered through the rear, under tight security. Her dress shimmered gold, her hair swept back in a soft twist. Calm. Composed. Not a hint of trouble. Backstage, a producer whispered her cue. She would go on after a violin performance by a young cancer survivor. Her speech was brief, hopeful, designed to be remembered for grace. She walked onto the stage to warm applause. "Good evening," she began, voice steady. "Thank you for having me." For a few minutes, everything was under control. She spoke of strength, courage, children ringing remission bells. Her voice never faltered, but backstage, a staffer glanced at his phone. The Crockett segment had detonated. The footage from the inaugural ball. Side-by-side shots of Ellis and Melania. Commentary from analysts. Reactions from veterans. It was all airing, right now. Not a whisper passed from one headset to another. The director paled. "Tell her team," he said into the mic. The AN aide stepped quietly into the wings, made the signal, a clean, silent swipe across the chest. "Wrap it up." Melania paused, lips parted mid-sentence. The podium beneath her hands felt heavier, her earpiece clicked. Live coverage. Crockett allegations, footage on air now. The air in the ballroom shifted. People were glancing around, whispering. Phones lit up like stars. A woman near the front lifted her screen for her husband to see. There it was, the dance. The look, the headline, Melania's secret. Crockett claims Melania misled the American people. Melania's breathing shifted, controlled, but strained. She glanced left, then right. One of her Secret Service agents stepped forward. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for her glass of water, but her fingers trembled too much to lift it. She set it back down, then she looked out at the crowd. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The room stayed frozen. A regional camera angle, meant only for local news, was picked up by live streamers. It captured everything, her lips pressed together, her eyes blinking hard, again and again. She didn't faint. She didn't flee, she simply stepped back from the mic and into the waiting arms of her security team. Whispers swept across the ballroom. Guests hesitated, some lifted their phones to film, others lowered theirs out of respect. The live stream feed cut suddenly to a white screen. One sentence appeared: "We are experiencing technical difficulties," but the internet wasn't. Within minutes, clips were everywhere, 3 separate angles, all showing the same moment. Her hesitation. The tension in her jaw. The pale strain on her face. An aide reached toward her, trying to steady her, but didn't make it in time. Was it fear? Was it guilt? Some said she looked cornered. Others said she looked like someone finally letting go of a secret too heavy to carry. The White House responded within the hour. One line: "The First Lady experienced a brief medical episode and is now resting." No mention of Jasmine Crockett. No mention of Sergeant Ellis Rowan. No denial. No clarification, just silence, and that silence rang louder than any defense. While Melania disappeared from view, Jasmine Crockett stepped forward. And she wasn't backing down. The headlines came fast: "Crockett crosses the line." Congresswoman. Weaponizes the First Lady's private life. Politics or vengeance? Criticism hit hard, especially from conservative media. Commentators called her reckless, vindictive, even dangerous. One former White House official, fuming on radio, said, "She's not just accusing the First Lady of an affair, she's dragging the military into it." A U.S. Army sergeant. That's not bravery. That's destruction. But Jasmine didn't flinch on an press conference. No walk back. She returned to Capitol Hill and walked straight into a scheduled committee meeting. Reporters swarmed her. "Do you still stand by your allegations?" She didn't stop walking. "I stand by the truth." Later that day, she tweeted, "Power hides, but not forever," and suddenly, the conversation began to shift. While networks debated her motives, smaller voices rose: young voters, veteran spouses, disillusioned moderates. They didn't see her as reckless. They saw resolve, and then came the leak that Jasmine's team hadn't planned to release the files. Not yet. But the pressure was rising, and the noise was deafening. That night, her office issued a quiet, precise statement, due to a flood of misinformation and coordinated attacks on Congresswoman Crockett. "We are releasing selected redacted documents submitted to our office by independent sources and verified through multiple legal channels. They didn't prove an affair, but they raised new questions, serious ones that travel logs. Military visitor records. Gaps in the First Lady's schedule. 7 visitor entries. Names redacted. But dates aligned with Melania's known appearances. 3 travel reimbursements for Ellis Rowan, matching cities where she had been photographed. 1 internal memo from a White House scheduler questioning repeated unscheduled downtime on the First Lady's calendar, none of it flashy. All of it precise, and when placed together, it suggested not just coincidence, but intent. Critics pushed back. "There's no proof they were ever alone in a room," one said, but the mood had shifted. The public wasn't asking if something happened. They were asking who helped keep it quiet. That late-night hosts who had mocked Jasmine now treaded carefully. One quipped, "It's hard to say she's making it up when the First Lady walks off stage mid-sentence and vanishes for 3 days." And then came the poll, buried in a Pew report. Jasmine Crockett's approval among independents had surged. Among voters under 35, it had doubled. Young women, especially, weren't calling it gossip. They were calling it courage. "She said what needed to be said," one TikTok creator posted, "and she brought receipts." Jasmine didn't soak in the attention. She showed up. She voted. Sat through budget meetings. Walked the halls with no fanfare. The silence around her wasn't emptiness. It was pressure. Building, because the public didn't just want whispers anymore, they wanted proof, and they were about to get closer than anyone expected. By sunrise over San Antonio, the documents were being dissected live by legal bloggers, military veterans, and former staffers. One spreadsheet stood out. It tracked the First Lady's undocumented movements between February and July, and every line told a story that had never been meant to surface. The unraveling, Jasmine's data, and the tipping point. Jasmine Crockett's team had taken the raw files and done what the White House hadn't, put the pieces together. They overlaid Ellis Rowan's base assignments and Army travel logs with the First Lady's movement schedule, down to dates and destinations. The pattern that emerged wasn't speculation. It was precision. 6 separate dates. 6 cities. No official functions. No public appearances. Just matching locations during unaccounted windows in Melania Trump's schedule. 1 stood out: Jackson, Mississippi. A quiet weekend stopover that baffled White House staffers. Melania's plane made an unplanned landing there en route from Dallas. No scheduled events, no public remarks, but Ellis Rowan had been reimbursed by the Army for 2 nights in Jackson, lodging listed at a boutique hotel just 4 blocks from the same airstrip where Melania's jet touched down. Coincidence? Some still insisted yes, but then came something harder to dismiss. An internal White House memo, marked Level 2, Eyes Only, described a scheduling misalignment, involving the First Lady's security team and an unnamed military officer who had entered a secure zone without clearance. The language was vague. Almost evasive, but the date matched the Jackson incident and people started paying closer attention. Then came the phone logs. Though heavily redacted, the metadata told a different kind of truth. Over a 3-month span, Ellis Rowan's phone made more than 30 late-night calls to a number with an encrypted federal line, an executive branch area code known for internal communications, not social use. Tech analysts were blunt. You don't use a number like that unless you have something to hide. More documents followed. Transcripts from anonymous interviews with base personnel. Redacted names, generic titles, but the tone was unmistakable. He changed after February, one said. Used to be sharp. Then he got quiet. Guarded. He started leaving base with no notice. Said it was cleared. We didn't ask, but his face said enough. And then there was the room log. A government-owned residence just outside Fort Meade, usually reserved for civilian contractors. 6 weeks of overnight bookings, all under an alias. But the signature on the check-in forms matched Ellis Rowan's. Known handwriting, a detail flagged by a whistleblower who had once trained him. Still, there was no smoking gun photos of the two together. No text messages. No security footage beyond that one silent moment at the inaugural ball, but the context had masked into something undeniable. The public didn't need a confession. They were building their own case. Cable segments sharpened. Editorial boards weighed in. Even conservative voices, once skeptical, began admitting, quietly, off record, that the White House was failing the optics war. Melania's continued silence didn't help. 3 full days without a public appearance. No denial. No rebuttal. Not even a statement. Meanwhile, Jasmine's office confirmed 2 new whistleblowers had reached out, both military, both anonymous. Their message? The affair wasn't just real. It was an open secret, and it had been deliberately buried. A school safety panel in Austin, Jasmine finally addressed it head-on. I'm not here for tabloid headlines. But when someone in public office, even a ceremonial one, uses their access to sidestep protocol, it becomes a national issue. Not because of morality. Because of accountability. The applause was brief but meaningful. Emails and messages poured in. Veterans, former staffers, young voters. All saying the same thing, thank you for not backing down, but there was still one voice missing. The man at the center of it all, and just as the story teetered toward overexposure, the silence cracked again. Day 4 came and went. Still no word. From Melania. No comment from the president. And now the media wasn't treating it as breaking news. They were treating it as a scandal. First Lady Gate? That phrase, once clickbait, was now appearing in official segment titles. Radio hosts debated, how long does silence equal guilt? And the people noticed. Outside the West Wing, a small protest began. A few handwritten signs. If she lied, what else is hidden? We deserve answers. By the next day, it had grown into the hundreds. Quiet. Focused. Young. Many had never been politically active before. Across the country, rallies appeared at local government buildings. Not in hatred, but in frustration. Who authorized those meetings, and what else took place during them? The administration still wouldn't say. When the press pressed for answers, the White House communications director offered only a curt dismissal during an unrelated briefing. We do not entertain gossip. The First Lady is a private individual. Any suggestion otherwise is offensive. But it wasn't that response that reignited the fire. It was what came next, from an unexpected source to a campaign event in Tulsa. Donald Trump was asked offhand by a reporter, "Do you have any response to the allegations involving your wife and Sergeant Rowan?" Trump smirked. "Fake news," he said, and turned away. It wasn't the words that hit. It was the smirk. The expression didn't read as denial, it read as indifference. As though he already knew, and simply didn't care to explain. Social media lit up instantly. He didn't deny it. He looked like he already knew. The clip spread fast, trending under #TrumpKnew. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained silent, but hers wasn't absence. It was calculation. Her office confirmed she'd speak the next day at a town hall in Amarillo. Reporters booked flights. Viewers set reminders. One question kept rising: if Melania wouldn't speak, would Ellis Rowan? But before Jasmine could take the stage, everything shifted. A military journalist broke the news: Sergeant Rowan had agreed to talk. Until now, Ellis Rowan had said nothing, not when his name leaked, not when the first rumors surfaced. His commanding officer had issued a blanket statement weeks earlier, saying Rowan was focused on duty and not authorized to speak on private matters. After that, he vanished behind base gates. Then came a quiet call to Kara Hensley, a no-nonsense defense reporter and podcaster in Albuquerque. She wasn't mainstream, but she was trusted inside the military community. At 7 a.m., she posted a 26-word tweet: "Just got off the phone with Sergeant Ellis Rowan. Full interview drops in 4 hours. You'll want to hear it. No filters. No games." The internet stopped. No one had expected him to speak. By the time the interview dropped, Kara's site crashed twice from the surge in traffic. The audio was under 13 minutes, clear, calm, and unmistakably real. "I didn't come forward before," Rowan began, "because the minute this became about politics, it stopped being about truth." He didn't confirm the affair. But he didn't deny it either. "I've worked with a lot of civilians. Some from the White House. Escorting public officials isn't unusual," he said. Then he paused. "But I was told, more than once, to keep those meetings off record. To delete entries. To say I was somewhere I wasn't. That's not standard. That's not what I signed up for." Kara asked him directly, "Did you have a personal relationship with the First Lady?" Rowan hesitated. "I had an understanding with someone in power. That's all I'll say. I've been loyal to my country. But I won't lie to cover for people who think they're above accountability." It was maddeningly vague, but it was real. That he confirmed the late-night visitor logs. Confirmed being at Fort Meade. Confirmed meetings with someone from the First Lady's circle. Never once did he say Melania's name. He didn't have to. Then came the quote that made headlines: "When people ask if something happened, what they really want to know is if the rules still apply to people in power." I think we all know the answer to that. Calm. Controlled. Devastating. Every major outlet clipped the quote. Twitter exploded with reaction. This was no longer just about scandal, it was about systems, cover-ups, and the cost of silence. Some conservative commentators tried to downplay it. "He never said the words," one barked. "This is all shadows." But the public didn't need a full confession anymore. They had the video from Lackland, the travel logs, the phone metadata. And now, the voice of the man in the center, saying just enough to make denial feel like a lie. By day's end, the Department of Defense announced an internal review into unauthorized interactions between civilian officials and active duty personnel. They didn't name Ellis or Melania. But everyone understood what it meant that night. In Amarillo, Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage of a packed civic center as news of the interview still echoed through the media. The room, filled with pressed shirts and folding chairs, stood. To applaud, she didn't address Sergeant Rowan directly. She didn't need to. We've been taught, she said, that the powerful don't owe us the truth. That if someone is rich enough, or married high enough, they get to walk away from hard questions. I don't accept that. I never will. The room erupted. Her words weren't about gossip. They were about standards and trust, but the final voice was still missing, and when Melania finally spoke, no one was prepared for how quiet, how stark, her words would be. It happened without announcement. No press release. No aides. No tip-offs. 4 days after Ellis Rowan broke his silence, Melania Trump appeared at the Ronald Reagan Children's Hospital in Tempe, Arizona. It was a scheduled visit, quietly listed on the hospital calendar weeks earlier, FLOTUS to visit pediatric ward. No media presence. Word spread anyway. By the time she arrived, a small group had gathered outside: staff, families, 2 freelance photographers who showed up on a hunch. She didn't wave. Didn't smile. Her dress was gray. Simple. A far cry from her usual appearances. Inside, she read books to children. Sat with parents. Signed teddy bears. Complimented a girl's red nail polish. It was soft. Intimate. Human. Then, just before she left, a nurse, maybe not even meaning to, asked the question, "Why now?" Melania paused. Looked her in the eye. And in the clearest voice she'd spoken in days, said, "Because disappearing doesn't fix anything." 7 words. No spin. No anger. No follow-up, just silence, and the weight of everything those words left unsaid. She gave just a glance down the hallway before turning toward the exit. But it wasn't the walk, it was the words that stayed behind. Disappearing doesn't fix anything. It spread faster than anything Melania Trump had ever said as first lady. Those 7 words struck a nerve. People who had spent weeks condemning her found themselves hesitating, wondering if maybe, just maybe, she felt something deeper. Not just shame. Maybe sadness. Maybe regret, but even that moment of clarity couldn't erase the weight of her silence. Editorials poured in. Some argued it was too little, too late. Others called it a quiet confession, the closest thing to acknowledgement the public would ever get. Yet nearly everyone agreed on one point: she looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone who knew the truth, had lived with it, and understood that no statement now would rewrite what people already believed. Later that evening, White House Press Secretary Ronald Brent faced a press pool hungry for answers. Every question looped back to the same thing: Melania's appearance, and whether her words were meant as a response to the scandal still dominating headlines. Brent kept his tone neutral. The First Lady was attending a children's outreach event. Her remarks were not political. One reporter pressed, but they were public and interpreted by millions as a response. Brent didn't blink. You're free to interpret. We stand by our position. No further comment. But by then, the story had already slipped out of the administration's hands. News anchors repeated her words like scripture. Social media adopted them like gospel. People printed them on t-shirts, quoted them in therapy, and shared them like truth bombs. Disappearing doesn't fix anything. To some, it felt like confession. To others, a warning. A reminder that silence only works for so long before the truth finds its voice. Jasmine Crockett didn't respond publicly. When asked about Melania's statement at a local town hall in El Paso, she simply said, "Sometimes people speak the loudest when they say the least." No theatrics. No victory lap. Just restraint. She didn't need more than that. Melania had spoken, on her terms, in her time. It wasn't an admission. But it also wasn't a denial. Just 7 plain words that somehow felt more honest than anything issued from a podium. They didn't change the facts. They didn't end the story. But they made her human again, and just like that, the country stood at a quiet crossroads. Because from that point forward, the conversation stopped being about just scandal, and started being about something harder: what we do when truth gets uncomfortable. The storm didn't end. It simply changed form. Cable shows kept arguing. Opinion. Columns stacked up like bricks. Online, the narrative fractured, splintering into theories, rebuttals, memes, and moral reckonings. Everyone had something to say. But no one could agree on what the truth meant anymore. What they could agree on, something had shifted. For weeks, the Melania Ellis Rowan story had played like celebrity gossip wrapped in political stakes. But once the noise faded, what remained was raw and unresolved, questions of honesty, power, and public trust, because this wasn't just about whether the First Lady crossed a line. It was about what people in power believe they're entitled to hide, and who has the courage to say no. Jasmine Crockett never issued a final statement. She didn't have to. Her silence, in the closing days, was intentional. She'd said what mattered. The facts spoke. And when the facts didn't speak loud enough, the patterns filled in the rest. By the end of the month, her polling had plateaued, but it hadn't dropped. What she gained wasn't just political support, but something stronger: trust. Not because of what she exposed, but how. Calm, clear, and uncompromising in the belief that powerful people should play by the same rules. The president never addressed the affair, not even once. Eventually, his staff issued a flat, forgettable statement. The president and First Lady remained focused on their family and on serving the American people. Translation? Let it die, but the people didn't. Not really. Sergeant Ellis Rowan quietly transferred to a lower-profile position in Nevada. No press. No punishment. Just a quieter patch of desert. Fewer eyes. A smaller badge. And the private burden of being the man at the center of a storm, recognized by all, named by none. Melania made 2 more public appearances that year. She smiled. She waved. She stood beside her husband, unfazed. But she never said anything more than those 7 words, and yet, those words lived on. A disappearing doesn't fix anything. Teachers quoted it in classrooms. Activists painted it on protest signs. Therapists echoed it in offices with clients who'd been quiet too long. It became more than a quote, it became a reckoning, because maybe that's the real lesson buried under it all: not who was guilty or innocent, but what happens when silence replaces truth. Some people disappear because they're avoiding consequences. Others disappear because they hope the heat will pass. But most disappear because, deep down, they already know what's true, even if they're not ready to say it out loud. The story of Melania and Ellis Rowan wasn't just about them. It was about the people who chose not to look. The staffers who kept quiet. The aides who cleaned the trail. The institutions built to protect power instead of integrity, and in the middle of it all stood one Congresswoman who said enough was enough. Jasmine Crockett didn't change the country overnight. But she reminded it of something crucial: truth doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it comes in fragments. In midnight phone calls. In redacted files. In grainy footage you only understand after watching it twice, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. In the end, there was no clean headline. No perfect confession. Just a moment that tore the curtain back long enough to make the public question the story they'd been told. Was it right to expose something so personal? Was it fair? That depends on how much you believe power deserves protection, but Jasmine's words still echo: if we don't hold the powerful accountable, what example do we set for everyone else? Maybe that's the takeaway: not the scandal. Not the politics, but the cost of silence, and the price of truth.